My name is Stacey Samoy, and I'm someone who transitioned from a non-technical background to a technical background, specifically data analytics. And within 3 years, I was able to grow from entry-level data analyst to senior data analyst, and now I'm a strategy and analytics lead. And in this video, we're just simply going to talk about like what's the difference between a data analyst, a data engineer, and a data science. Yeah. So when I talk about the data scientist, I'll probably talk a bit about like a machine learning engineer. And if you do have any more questions with regards to like machine learning engineer and you want me to cover that title specifically, do let me know down in the comments below. And even when we're talking about data engineering, I'm going to also, I have my notebook here. So let me just write something here, ML engineer. Yeah. And then even as we talk about like data engineering, I'll also talk a bit about like analytics engineer. So like what's that role? Yeah. But yeah, the whole point of this video is to just tell you like what do these different roles do? And this can help guide you in terms of like if you're someone who's new to data or someone who's like in the tech field and you're looking to like transition to the data side of things, like which aspect of it is like more aligned to you. And yeah, for each particular thing, each particular role, I'm just going to introduce the role. So, like, what does this person do on a day to day? What type of skills do you need? And then what's a possible growth path? But of course, I lean more towards like possible growth paths for a data analyst because that's where I currently sit and that's where like I understand it like 100%. But yeah, let's get into the video. So, who's the data analyst? What does a data analyst do? What skills does a data analyst ideally possess? And like, what would their growth path look like? Yeah. So a data analyst, just from like the title, is someone who like you'll probably spend a lot of your time doing exploratory data analysis. Yeah. So most data projects that you will see out there, yeah, like even if it's a data science project, you have to start with data exploration, and then that's when you go to building your models. So data exploration will entail like finding your data, cleaning your data, doing a bit of modeling, do a bit of feature engineering if like the data point, the column, the feature, same thing that you're interested in is not there, you'd ideally need to do some calculations to create it. So as a data analyst, you essentially kind of stop there. Like it's good to have like knowledge in terms of like what does like a data scientist do, a machine learning engineer do when it comes to like the modeling bit, because sometimes you are the one who's probably going to work very closely like with various stakeholders like business owners, whether it's someone in marketing, someone in operations, someone in growth, to like operationalize how you're going to use that model. So it's good to understand it, but most of the time your work will end at the exploration. Yeah. So that it looks like you're a general data analyst and there'll be requests in terms of like, oh yeah, I want to understand how is general conversion? How is conversion by various acquisition channels? That's something that's likely to come from like a growth and marketing team. How are our download signups and applications doing? Like what's the trend like? That's like building a chart, giving visibility into like what's happening in terms of like the pipeline, something you'd ideally do for the marketing team. Maybe people want to understand like how is the retention trend month over month? How is retention by various segments? It could be by gender, it could be by location, it could be by product type. So you'll do a lot of this like exploration. Some of them are like very straightforward, find me this, or it could be like a blanket statement. Oh, what's going on with retention so far, like year to date? Like it's not trending as we expected. Like help us find out what is wrong. So you'd ideally do a lot of that exploration, finding out like what's going on, either like up from a very direct question or it's just your responsibility, like you're the owner of that retention metric and you're constantly exploring it and just looking to optimize it. So as a data analyst, you will do a lot of exploratory data analysis. Yeah. So as I already mentioned, you'd also be very close to like business stakeholders. So if you're someone who's like very chatty, you really like engaging with people, getting to understand like various business gaps, like this role is likely to be more aligned with you. Not to say that you won't do like the same if you're like a data engineer or a data science, like you will engage with stakeholder to a certain extent, but a data analyst, like every other day, you will, I could say, be glued to your stakeholders. So whether you're like a data analyst who's working in product, you find yourself spending a lot of time with like product managers and product analysts and product owners. If you're a data analyst in operations, you'll find yourself like spending a lot of time with various like roles in the operations team, just really understanding their pain points, their challenges, and just helping them translate like their day-to-day gaps or challenges into like data solutions. Yeah. Then this will ideally entail like a lot of dashboarding, which is something that I feel like I've implied. So when you're doing your exploratory data analysis, there'll be some exploratory data analysis where it's just like a one-off project, you do a report, you share. But there's also the aspect of like building dashboards that give various stakeholders visibility into like what they care about. And these are dashboards that you'll ideally have to maintain. So as a data analyst, a big part of your job will be dashboarding to running projects, running experiments. Also, especially like on the running projects part, it's like something I've already implied. So you could be metric owner. So whether you're someone who's generally responsible for conversion or generally responsible for retention, like you'd ideally be expected to like actively monitor this metric and not wait for it to like start declining for you to do something. Like your constant role would be like maintaining it and optimizing it and continuing to push whatever metric. So that will involve like various projects, yeah. And with projects, like it comes a lot. It could be a project that turns into, sorry, an experiment. So you're like, oh, I've noticed that retention dips in this particular part of the app, or when we push this behavior, or when we launch this feature, yeah, but we're not really sure. So you could ideally run an experiment with like, okay, a scenario where we have this feature as it is and it's yellow, and then a scenario where we have this feature in blue and this feature in green. So that's figuratively. So it's like there's never one way to do something. You could do something severally, and you could do something not severally, rather in many ways. So one of the ways you could actually end up like making a decision in terms of like this is the best way possible to run something is by doing an experiment. So that's whether I'm trying to think of like a very direct example. So it could be something like the company used to allow people to make payments in a certain way, yeah, like a two-stage process, yeah. And people are so used to it. And if you change it to a one-stage process, like some people will get confused and will miss certain things, or they'll think something is wrong. So you could experiment with like the current two-stage or one stage, and then the three-stage is probably the ideal one, which allows you as the organization to collect all the information you need from the client. But you're like, hey, some people will be like, now three stages is too long. You could run an experiment and see what happens with all those three. So like, do people actually end up like going all the way to the end of the flow and actually consuming your project? So that's just like a basic example, but honestly, you will probably find yourself running a lot of experiment. And of course, depending on the nature of your organization, is an organization like an organization that is like experimentation fast, but most take roles, especially in fast-paced startups, as a data analyst, you will run experiments. So before I just go into like skills and like possible growth paths for like the data analyst role, something I'd also like to mention, even the data scientist, the machine learning engineer, and the data scientist and the machine learning engineer, they will do things like dashboarding, but most of the time you'll find like the dashboarding that they do is for them. So maybe the data engineer has built a certain pipeline. I will explain what that pipeline is when we get to like exploring the data engineer role. And they just want to make sure like everything is going as planned, like that pipeline is updating as frequently as possible. They can just set a dashboard to give them alerts and give them a view of like what's happening with regards to all these various pipelines that have built. Same to a data scientist. A data scientist, no, a data scientist can actually just build dashboards like in the process of like their exploration and like continued learning. So if you know you're a data scientist and you maintain and like build various models, be it like a model that guides and like predicts like this client is likely to retain, I mean, to churn, whether it's a model that's likely to like assess someone's risk, whether it's a model that like guides pricing or whatever, like you're likely to be constantly doing exploration to just try and understand like these various spaces, whether it's like the retention space, the pricing space, the risk space, and like continuously learning would mean you're gathering all this information that gives you like data that can go back into your model and like make it better. So all these people still do dashboarding. They still do, oh yeah, it was dashboarding I was talking about here, and they do interact with stakeholders to a certain extent, but we'll get into that in depth when we go to those roles. But I thought it was just worth mentioning. And like maybe to just conclude on that point, you see like I've done like data science projects, and all data science projects actually start with like data exploration. So it's essentially where a data analyst starts and stops. And then once the data scientist has done this exploration, that exploration will guide like how their modeling would be. So like which type of model are they using? Are they using a logistic regression? Are they going to use a decision tree? Are they going to use a naive Bayes? Are they going to use neural networks? Like all those will be determined by like the insights they get during exploration. So that is also going to say that you could start over as a data analyst and then decide to transition to like data engineering and data science, because a lot of these skills are shared. But what I'd say at this point is like the biggest difference between these three roles is like how much time you spend with a stakeholder. As a data analyst, you're going to be like at the front, like forefront, really interaction with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders will know you, but sometimes the stakeholders can't forget that we have like a data engineer or a data scientist or a machine learning in the team. They'll always be like, who's that? I'm like, that's a machine learning engineer. Like, oh, we have one of those. Yeah. But yeah. But then just to close again, not to say that if you're someone who's more introverted, you can't do these roles, you can, because data roles also vary. And that's also something that I plan to like talk about, like various types of data roles. You could be in a data role that is like very operational, very close to like a department that is very customer facing. You could be a data role that sits in the technical team. So you sit in engineering, you sit in product, and maybe that's what you prefer because your personality is not very, you're not like someone who really wants to be out there in terms of like interaction with so many stakeholders. Like there's always something for someone. Yeah. And then let's go into the skills. Yeah. So for the skills, honestly, this is nothing new, especially if you've been in this journey with me for a while. You know the skills that I'm always like talking about that you need to learn as someone who's looking to become a data analyst. Yeah. And it's same old, learn your SQL. And this is a must. Like even if you happen to end up in a role where like maybe you primarily use Power BI, like just for being able to be like relevant in the market and easily switch between jobs, learn SQL. Even if you happen to start with a role that maybe you primarily use Power BI, you primarily use Tableau, still learn SQL, yeah? So what is it called? Skills that a data analyst would need is one, learn SQL, data visualization tool, or rather the concept of data visualization and storytelling. Because whether you decide to learn this and you're like focusing more on like let's say Power BI, or you're focusing more on Tableau, like those things are more similar than they are different. So like if you focus more on like learning Tableau, you could actually easily pick up Power BI. So a data visualization tool, learn SQL, and then of course, like you need to be very good in terms of like your basic statistics and math, like your college algebra. When it comes to statistics, things like measures of central tendency, things like measures of variations. Like these are things that these are things that you're going to use on a daily, like utilizing averages and like which is the best average. In this case, are you supposed to be using a mean, a median, a mode? Are you supposed to be using like a percentile, whether it's the 75th percentile and whatnot? Like these are things that you need to know. And then it's, of course, even from the point of like experimentation, hypothesis testing is a concept in statistics. So also just getting familiar with such like statistics to a certain level will go a long way for you. So when it comes to growth paths, like what like if I decide to get into this data analyst world, like what next for me? So as I mentioned earlier, you can actually transition to like data engineering or data science if that's something that you're interested in. Or you could just grow, like you come from junior data analyst to mid-level to senior data analyst. And then a good example is like I'm currently a strategy and analytics lead. So going more into the strategy side is also something that is like a potential path for you. And then from my personal opinion, of course, this is not true. Like this is not like final truth, like different realities are there. Like you can also just become a head of a function. So maybe you are the data analyst who was like responsible for growth, you're the data analyst who was responsible for marketing, or the data analyst who's like supporting operations. Like a possible path for you is actually becoming like a head of operations, head of marketing, head of growth. Like it's just becoming a head of like that function. But for that to become a reality, you actually need to do the work and actually like get really good in terms of like what that function is. Because supporting the data of marketing, supporting the data arm of growth, or supporting the data arm of operations is one thing, but all those functions have like a lot on their own as their function. So like that's a possible path, but a path that I usually find like a bit more straightforward is like strategy. Because it's one thing to guide strategy when it comes to like how a company is growing, a company's daily operations, what products to invest in, versus actually being in the nitty-gritty of like the operations, the growth, the marketing, the product management, etc. So strategy tends to be like a bit more of a straightforward path-ish. Of course, you have to do the work. You need to, of course, you need to do the work. You need to refine whatever skills that you need to refine, gain whatever skills you need to gain. But that's usually a possible growth path. And then something else to just say before like I conclude on this is like both the technical and the soft skills matter. Most of you here who are just taking this journey and are like are here with me in this platform, whether it's through watching my technical videos or listening to such sit-down videos, like you're getting there, you're probably there, yeah. And your technical skills, you're good. Something that you should never forget to invest in is your soft skills, because the more senior you become, the more important like soft skills come in. So like, how is your emotional intelligence? How are your like collaboration skills? How do you manage up? How do you manage down? How do you manage laterally? These are all things that you really need to work on as someone who's looking to grow from a data analyst to whatever. And then yeah, something else that you could also transition to. I know I talked about like more of like the technical parts, whether it's like a data engineer or a data scientist, but you can also transition and become a product manager. So go into like the product management space, depending on your interest. Yeah. And yeah, if some of these things, like all these roles that I'm mentioning, are things that you'd want me to like talk about in depth, do let me know down below in the comments. So just talking about like various roles that you're likely to like collaborate with in the data space, like what does it look like day in the life of a data analyst? Who are you talking to? What do they do? etc. Happy to talk more about like other roles, like roles you intersect with generally. Or if you're specifically interested in tech roles, happy to just talk more through like who's a product manager, who's a software engineer, who's what is it called? I'm trying to think of a software engineer, quality assurance officer. What is Internet of Things? Happy to talk about some of those things, yeah. Now let's go to the next role, which is data engineering. So this role enables a lot, like it is the beginning of data, yeah, because this is the role that enables like data analysts to have access to like quality, timely, and accurate data. And this is the same data that is ideally used by the data scientists also to do some exploration and build the model. So this is the person who owns where the data is stored, yeah. So and that would mean this is someone who's familiar with like building data pipelines. So what are data pipelines? Like literally just from the word a pipe, like you can have a pipe that is coming from location A to location B. They do the same thing. They pick data from location A and they put it in location B. And location B is probably somewhere where like an analyst or data analyst is able to, a data analyst or a data scientist is able to access this data and like do whatever they need to do with this information. So whether you're a company who has various CRMs, has an app, a CRM, some external data source, like ideally the data engineer would be picking all this data from this many sources and putting it somewhere in a form where it's like clean and ready to use. Hence the concept extract, transform, load, which is something also that if you'd want me to talk more about, do let me know in the comments below. And you don't really like nowadays, there's ETL, there's load transform, like you don't have to follow like the extract transform load. Like there are other ways you could do it. You could extract transform load, you could extract transform load, you could extract load transform. Like you don't really have to follow ETL anymore. Like they are not anymore per se, but like there are other ways to like work around that. Yeah, it's not just about ETL anymore. But yeah, this is someone who'd ideally be familiar with concepts like ETL, among others, when it comes to like principles of just getting your data ready and where it needs to be to just for the end users to be able to manipulate it. Yeah. So yeah. And so as mentioned, so this is someone who just enables like the data analyst and the data scientist to just have access to timely and accurate data. This is someone who's familiar with like the concept of data pipelines. This is someone who's familiar with data modeling, yeah. And at this point, I would like to introduce the role of like analytics engineer, yeah. So an analytics engineer is someone who's like hybrid. They can do a little bit of data engineering and they can also do a little bit of data science, yeah. And not data science, data analytics, yeah. And this analytics engineer role was also born around the time like DBT became a thing, yeah. So you can do some data modeling, yeah. So whether that means, let's say you work in an organization where there are like particular metrics that everyone consumes every other day. So there's no need to have it like built from scratch in various location in various data assets. You could model it, create this table, and that metric sits there. So whether someone from for whatever use case, like they pull from the same place. And if I'm to use an example of like it's a metric that is used across countries, so like very different, various countries. Yeah, you don't have to write it as many times as there are countries that you serve, you can write it in one place. Yeah, that would mean you've modeled the data, you've pre-created this metrics, and it's calculated once at a particular place, and that table holds it. So that's like a simple example of like what is like data modeling and what like analytics engineer would do. So why I chose to introduce an analytics engineer with that example is because you're an analyst, yeah. You start with the operations team, you really know like what do they need, what is like daily bread to them when it comes to certain metrics. And instead of like waiting for the engineering team to like data engineering team to do this for you, really understand like what is the importance of this. And then sometimes like there's just a lot to do, the sprints are full. So hence why the role data analytics engineer was born. So this is someone who understands like the nitty-gritties of like being a data analyst, but it can also do some basic data engineering, some basic modeling to just make their life easier. So even when they're building that dashboard, even when they're maintaining or doing some exploratory analysis, they're going to minimize the number of time they're building anything from scratch, because they also have the ability to model particular metrics that they know they reference to a lot, and they don't have to keep on recalculating it. So like if you know retention rate is something that you use every day, there's no need for you to write SQL or to write that function, like to write the calculation in Power BI to keep calculating retention. You can model it somewhere, store it in a table, and always refer to it. Yeah. And yeah, I hope you've learned something with regards to like who's the data analyst, who's the data engineer, and what is an analytics engineer. Yeah? I have my book here, hence why I keep on looking down. And yeah, data engineers, especially in this day and age, like work with big data. Yeah. And something that I learned some time back and really fascinated me is data engineers also use sampling techniques. Yeah. So as much as when I was talking about the data analysts, I was like, oh, they need to know their SQL, they need to know their data visualization tool, and they need to know their basic math and statistics. And I think I also forgot to mention like knowing Python is a nice to have. And honestly, in the spirit of continuing to learn, once you've learned those three, take time to learn something else, be it Python, be it JavaScript, learn something else as a data analyst, yeah. But when it comes to data engineering, they also use statistical concept, yeah. So you imagine a company like Google, yeah. So Google has data from like the Google search engine, they have data from YouTube and any other platform they might own. That's a lot of data. And in real sense, you don't need to have all these data points to be able to like make informed decision. Yeah. Let's think of like sensors. When sensors are conducted in like various countries, they don't literally count everyone. They use some form of like sampling, they sample, just they use a sampling technique, and then they extrapolate to be like, okay, so this is essentially the population that we have in this country. Yeah. So data engineers also use sampling techniques, yeah. So like imagine all the data that Google is consuming, yeah, wherever this data source is from. So this data engineer is responsible from pulling all this data from these various sources and putting it in one place, and you can't store all that data. So sometimes they use sampling techniques. So they'll be like, maybe uh this particular data, I refresh it, like what has come in the last 10 minutes, and I post then what came in the next 10 minutes. So there'll be a gap of like what came in between those 2 minutes. Like it might not really be used, because at the end of it all, like you don't need information on every single person to be able to make an informed decision. Just having a decent sample is enough. And again, just getting into the nitty-gritty of like statistical concept that you need for data. But of course, for me, I'll really zone in terms of like statistical concept that you need as data analyst, and like how you'd actually use them while in the industry. If that's something that you're interested in, stay tuned by subscribing, because for sure that is a video that will find its way to this channel one of these fine days. But yeah, these are people who also utilize like statistical methods to just build their pipelines and just ensuring that relevant stakeholders have the data they need availed to them. And then is there anything else? So, yeah, so this is more of like a backend role. Like this particular role, data engineering will not interface with stakeholders as much. So most of the time you find like there's a product manager or there's just someone more technical sitting in like in the business team who would be able to explain to these people what is needed. But you're less likely to find like a data engineer sitting in a meeting with like ops or marketing or growth. Almost never. Like it's more of a backend role. So if you're also someone who's not like very into like over interacting with like various stakeholders, this is definitely a role that is more of a good fit for you. But you will still have your own stakeholders. You just won't deal with a lot of people the way an analyst does, but you will still have stakeholders that you need to interact with. So when it comes to skills, this person needs SQL because that is like the language that is used for like most like structured, what are they called? Most structured databases. Yeah. So I forget the term, but it's like, yeah, structured databases. Yeah. Then we have databases that store unstructured data, like, and that goes into the next point, which is like another skill they need to have, which is just like, what did I write here? Uh, Data management concepts. So the various types of databases, whether it's structured, unstructured, how to manage, and then of course the languages that come with like managing those tools where SQL comes in. These people who actually you actually need to know Python as a data engineer, because some of those workflows, some of those data pipelines as you're building them, like SQL is not enough. You'd ideally need to use Python among other tools that are essential for you to be able to just build like a proper data pipeline. And then some math and statistics, as already mentioned before, because you will use, especially if you're working with big data, you're working in a company that really produces a lot of data, you will use some mathematics and like statistical concepts to just really be able to collect enough data without breaking the system or making it like too expensive or too slow. So when it comes to growth paths for these roles, honestly, again, the world is your oyster as long as you just do your due diligence and then just really zone in on like, if I want to be here, what do I need? You can do anything. But typically what I see for such roles is people either become like a staff data engineer. So a staff data engineer or rather a staff role is a role that's more senior than like a engineering manager, more senior than like a senior data engineer. So it's like staff. And then I think after staff, you could even potentially become a CTO. So our growth path here is becoming a staff data engineer. And then you can also become a head of data, but there would be a lot of upskilling that you would have to do. So I see for a data analyst, because you're so used to like handling all these stakeholders, like whether you like it or not, certain soft skills, you will have to learn them, yeah. But a data engineer, you'll be in the back interacting with not so many stakeholders, and you're probably interacting with people who are just as technical as you. But if you're looking to become like a head of data or CTO one day, you need to work on your soft skills too. Because with these roles, like the more senior you become, especially on like roles that do require a lot of admin, you need to really get better in terms of like your soft skills, how you communicate, how you collaborate, communicating to both like no voice and like people who are like subject matter experts. You need to be able to communicate to both of them. So a lot of upskilling will have to go there if that's like a path that you're interested in. And like a staff data engineer who is someone who's like very senior, but they're not keen in like getting into the nitty-gritty of like admin work. Like for them, they would probably be getting all these very big, high profile projects, and like your stakeholder management skills can still be limited to like the few technical people who you interact with. Yeah. And then we go to the last role, which is a data scientist. So what does a data scientist do? This is someone who builds various predictive models using concepts such as AI and machine learning. And you, of course, have to be very good at math and statistics. Like this is the role that would require the heaviest level of mathematical and statistical concepts. Yeah. Because honestly, what's machine learning? Like one machine learning model that I can think about is like a logistic regression. You had it, logistic regression. A regression is something that you learn in statistics. So you have to be really good in terms of like your math and your statistics, because a lot of these models you're building are essentially just mathematical and statistical models, mathematical and statistical concepts, but now you're using technology to just take them to the next level. Like it's no longer doing your regression on a piece of paper. You're actually building this regression using something like Python or something like R. Yeah. So yeah, that's basically what they do. And then they also do good experimentation. So whether it's like you've built this model and you have like model A, model B, and you want to experiment with like which one is better, or the type of experimentation that like a data analyst would actually do. Like experimentation is something that like a data scientist would also be involved in. And then this is also kind of a back end role, but like you're not as backend as a data engineer. Like you will interact with a good number of stakeholders, especially because you find yourself building models that really matter to like various business owners, whether it's like operations and they care about churn, or it's like something that's predicting likelihood of conversion and like the growth and marketing team cares about it. So you're likely to interface with them, right? Whether it's from the point of like they're curious what's actually under the hood, or you're the one who's just trying to collect a bit more information. So you will interact with them, but for very particular purpose. And like for a data analyst who it's like, I want this, I want that, I want that. For you, it's more of like we're having this very specific conversation about this certain thing that I want to understand better to make the model better, or they want to understand better so that they can utilize that model even better. So there will be some form of stakeholder interaction, but not as much as a data analyst would have. And then skill that I needed, math and statistics, as already mentioned, you'd need to learn Python and or R. I see most companies using Python, but honestly, it goes back to like one of the advice that I've already given you guys. If you've been here for a while, like take time and do due diligence in the area and the industry that you're interested in. What are they using more of? Is it Python or is it R? Like more academic and research inclined roles, like using R. So whether you're going to be part of like trying to understand this new medicine that you want to introduce into the industry, like most of those research type roles usually prefer R, but you find more like startups, fintechs, etc. are more likely to prefer Python. So do your research in terms of like which language you should zone in on. But I'll always say the most important thing is to learn like the principle and the fundamentals of it. Because whether you decide to start with R or decide to start with Python, you can easily transition to the other, especially if it's like R for data analytics, Python for data analytics. So again, if you're just at a learning stage, don't stress too much, just pick one and go with it. And then yeah, heavy math and statistics and learn your learn your Python, learn your SQL. Of course, you need to know like data analytics from like the point of like data exploration and actually storytelling, because you also need to explain to people what is this model of yours doing and why is it beneficial? Why should we take it up? etc. And then yeah, so I'm going to just talk about a bit about a machine learning engineer. So a machine learning engineer is essentially someone who can do like both like the building of model side, but on top of that, they can actually deploy their models. So that means their computer or their software engineering skills are also very strong. Because you see, most of the time you find like the data scientists will do the research, build this model, do a lot of like parameter tuning to get the model to be very strong, and then they hand it over to like the engineers to deploy it. But a machine learning engineer can do what a data scientist does, and then on top of that, they're able to take that model and they're deploying it themselves, and they're thinking about like how to refresh this model. Because they see, like here's a data scientist, your work is to just build the model, yeah, but how is it put in the app if it's going in the app? How is it put in the CRM if it's going to the CRM? How do we make sure this model is like being refreshed and being fed with like new data so that it's learning more frequently? A machine learning engineer goes to that level. So that would mean even their data engineering skills is at a strong level, because they're able to really think about like how should that data be stored, where should that data go, how does the data get to my model, and just keep on refreshing my model. So that's essentially what a machine learning engineer does. And then maybe you're wondering, how do I know all of this and I claim here to be a data analyst? Yeah. So it's just the reality of like the fact that this field is a field that has come from far, but it's still not there yet. And like not many companies can actually afford to have like all these roles. So especially if you're someone who's like going into a startup or even a very like big brand company, but they just still don't understand like the value of data, they might not hire for you all these roles. You'll find yourself being the data analyst, do a bit of data science, and then do data engineering. And then especially data analytics and data engineering, you kind of can't avoid it. But to say that, like, don't let it scare you. because I went in with just data analytics, yeah. And then on the job I learned. And that's one of the things that I talked about like in my previous video. So like you've landed your role, what next? How do you keep on thriving? How do you grow? How do you just make the most out of your career and make sure you're learning and you're just working towards something that is like makes sense for you, something that keeps you happy, something that keeps you aligned with your goals, again, depending on what your goal is. And one thing I said is like learning, like you will never stop learning. Like learning is a constant in this field. So for me, I went in as a data analyst, but I kid you not, I have been part of data science projects. I've been part of data engineering projects. I could even dare call myself an analytics engineer because I have built data models. Like you just learn on the job. And it goes back to the thing that I will always say. The most important thing is to get the fundamentals. Once you get the fundamentals, everything else is just a build up. It's just a build up. It's just a build up. Like the learning curve is steep at the start, but as you keep adding more things, like these are just concepts that build on each other. So yeah, that answers your question in terms of like, how do I know all these things? And I'm here claiming to be a data analyst. It's because learning is a constant in this field. And yeah, you will find companies that actually specialize. So you have a data analyst, you have a data engineer, you have a machine learning engineer, you have a data engineer, a data analyst, a machine learning engineer, a data scientist, but sometimes that's not the reality. In most, especially small companies that are just starting up, startups, or even just companies that are like, okay, I hear there's this thing called data, like data is the new oil. Like they will not have all these areas. So you kind of be forced to learn all of them. And then on top of that, you'll be sitting in a tech team with all these roles. Like once you get there or you happen to start on a big company, and you'll see and you'll get to learn. And then this thing is a cycle. So like if I'm to think of like a machine learning engineer that I have worked with before, yes, they build the model, but they'll also work a lot with the data analyst who really understands the data, and they can guide them in terms of like, oh yeah, this feature that you're engineering, it doesn't make sense because of this and this. So most of the time you'll find it's a partnership. You all work together, you all learn from each other. But otherwise, guys, that's it from me for this particular video. So I was just shooting this series of like a couple of thoughts and like ideas and like advice that I have for you people that I believe are like key to just help guide you. If you're someone who's looking to break into data, we've just broken into data and you're like, okay, what next for me? And this is actually the last of like the first five videos. So the first one was essentially like, what is it called? How would I do it if I was to start all over again? Just like me journeying into data analyst and then just talking about my journey more. So coming from zero to data analyst and then also just giving my experience as like Kenyan data analyst. How was I able to land a remote role? And yeah, this is the last one, just giving you guys advice in terms of like what does a data analyst, data engineer, and a data scientist do. And the whole point is like you get to understand what these various roles do, and this can essentially just help you be able to lock in like, okay, what direction do I want to take? So yeah, this is the last of the 4 videos, but don't worry, more is coming your way. I have a bunch of ideas written down here, and they're coming your way, and they're going to come your way early May. But for the series that you're expecting in April, this is the last video. If you've gone through all 4 of them and you've gotten this far, like, thanks. And I really hope you've learned. So let me know, like, what is your biggest takeaway and what else would you want me to keep talking about? And not to forget that this place is a one-stop shop. So one-stop shop, yeah. So we do such sit-down videos, but we also have like more technically inclined videos. So if you're someone who's looking to learn how to actually code in SQL, project-based learning, we do have projects like follow-along projects that you can utilize, whether you want to learn Power BI, whether you want to learn Tableau, whether you want to learn SQL, whether you want to learn how to use Excel for data analytics. We've got you. But otherwise, for the month of April, this is it. I'm not sure if this will come out in the last week of April or start of May, but yeah, this is it. See you in the next set of 4 videos, which will probably also be sit-down videos. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much. This was really nice. See you in the next one. Bye.